Welcome to A Healthy Curiosity, the podcast that explores what it takes to be well in a busy world with self-care strategies from Chinese medicine. I'm your host, Brody Welch, here to support you on your journey of health, happiness, and personal evolution. Welcome to today's episode of A Healthy Curiosity. I'm your host, Brody Welch, and with me today is a new friend of mine, Dr. Titus Chiu, who is an award-winning professor, healer, and functional neurologist with a deep passion for functional medicine, food, and the brain. He combines traditional healing with the latest breakthroughs in brain science, nutrition, and lifestyle medicine. And he's on a mission to show the world what is possible in the realm of healing and human potential using his heart, hands, voice, and mind. He helps patients with autoimmunity and complex neurological conditions get well and stay well by offering highly personalized wellness programs both online and in person at Coba Family Wellness Center in Berkeley, California. And the last time that I saw the very impressive and venerable Dr. Chiu, he was dressed as Doogie Howser, MD, along with his lovely wife, who was a computer, and I was dressed as Madonna at a conference that we met at recently. And so, a super fun person, in addition to a super impressive professional. And I'm just excited to have you on the show today, Dr. Chiu. Thanks for being willing to have this chat with me about the brain.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for inviting me to be a part of your podcast, Brody.
So when I asked you what you wanted to talk about today, the first word that you responded with, I didn't actually recognize as an English word, and I was like a little embarrassed about that. So I am hoping you could tell us all what Sensorigenomics is and why we should care.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, don't feel bad, because it's actually a term that I coined, that I came up with, and it's a fancy way of talking about how we can use our 5 common senses to heal our brains. So like the sense of smell or taste or touch or sound. So all those different things we can use that activate specific pathways that can communicate with our brain and create what's known as neuroplasticity, our brain's ability to change based on experience. And so I took this concept, I'm sure you're familiar with Dr. Jeffrey Bland, who coined the term nutrigenomics, where we can use nutrition to turn on or turn off genes leading to health or disease. Well, the brain is pretty amazing in the sense that it, in addition to like responding to food, the brain also responds to our senses. And so by using the different senses of sight or, different sounds or music, we can actually, in my practice, I use that to target specific areas of a person's brain, triggering a genomic response or neuroplasticity. So yeah, the term you never heard before because it was never spoken to before, because I coined it.
Okay. Got it. Well, that is totally fascinating, and I would love to learn more. So what kinds of conditions are you working with, and how? I'd love to just get a sense of what it's like to be in your clinic, and how are you bringing in the 5 senses to change the brain?
No, that's a great question. And one of the ways, so if you just imagine we have a 2,000 square foot healing center, and we are very cognizant of the fact that our senses play a big part, not only on our brain health, but also our emotional health. So we work with a lot of patients with autoimmunity, specifically things like Hashimoto's, multiple sclerosis. And we also work with a lot of patients with complex neurological conditions like chronic issues like anxiety or post-concussion syndrome and Alzheimer's and dementia. So as soon as you walk into our office, it's not like a typical medical office. The walls are painted like this beautiful teal color, light blue. So you feel like you're kind of floating in this gorgeous healing ocean, right? And
nice.
Me and my partner, yeah, we're both water signs. I'm a Scorpio, she's a Pisces. So we just love that whole energetics of, and symbolism of water. And so as soon as you walk in the space, it's like you're being hugged, by the ocean. And so working with patients then, I'll do a pretty comprehensive workup, right? Because it's all about getting to the root cause of why someone is suffering from anxiety or Hashimoto's or, post-concussion syndrome in the first place. So I'll perform a whole history, and then I'll do an advanced neurological exam, and I might look at things like balance and coordination. I'll look at how a person's eyes move, because all of these are really, really unique windows into how well their nervous system's working. And so as an example, if someone, I'm testing the coordination and they're less coordinated on the left versus the right side of their body, that's very diagnostic. That tells me that this area of their nervous system called the cerebellum on the left side might not be working as well as it is on the right. And that can play a huge role in a person's ability to balance, to coordinate their movements, but also the cerebellum, interestingly enough, modulates the immune system. So a lot of patients I work with, with Hashimoto's or things like concussion syndrome, what ends up happening if they have like a weakness of their cerebellum, not only could they have issues with coordination, but it can also be a root cause for their immune dysregulation, as an example. And so after I do it is. It's really cool stuff. And so after I do a whole workup based on what comes up, so let's say this area of their nervous system called the cerebellum on their left side isn't working as well as their right. And I can tell that, for example, if they can't balance as well on their left leg versus their right, or if I have them, move their arms up and down, what we call alternating arm testing. If it's not as coordinated on the left as the right, then I could say, maybe there's an issue with their left cerebellum, and then apply a sensorigenomic or a very specific therapy based on using the 5 common senses. So something like, as an example, of therapy might be I do a chiropractic adjustment on the left side of their body, because when I do that, it actually activates a very specific pathway from their spinal cord into their left cerebellum, creating the sensorigenomic response or creating neuroplasticity, in effect like exercising and strengthening that area. And then as a take-home exercise, I could then have them balance on their left leg while they're brushing their teeth with their left hand, as an example to continue that neuroplastic process.
So you're having the person activate that area of their brain by balancing on their left leg, brushing their teeth with their left hand, and that is going to create kind of a feedback loop that's going to help them heal? Exactly.
It creates this, exercising activation and leading to what's known as neuroplasticity, but specifically in the area of the nervous system that is a little weaker. And so if they do this like often and, long enough, they can create these long-term changes. That's what sensorigenomics is. And it's using, again, the 5 common senses. In this case, there's actually a 6th bonus sense, which we call proprioception, that we've probably learned about, in school, but most people aren't aware of how it impacts their life. But proprioception is one of the most important senses. And when we practice things like balance, or we do things like yoga, we do things like Pilates, that specific type of sensation of proprioception becomes activated, and that leads to healing in the nervous system.
So proprioception is that sense of where we are in space. It's like how our brain maps where our physical body is, right?
The common term for it is body awareness, and we get awareness of our bodies through many different senses, but one of the ones that's just kind of running in the background that most of us aren't aware of is what's known as proprioception. So if you actually want to do a little experiment now, like Brody, just close your eyes, and then everyone out there in the audience, just close your eyes, and I want you to raise your arms right out in front of you, like straight ahead in front of you with your eyes closed, okay? And now do something with your fingers, like maybe curl the first finger or make a little, like a little peace sign, okay? With your eyes closed now, can you sense what your fingers are doing and what they're doing?
I think so.
Like, can you perceive where your fingers are, like the position of them?
I believe I can, only in the sense that I'm in the habit of doing things like Qigong and yoga on a regular basis with my eyes closed. So I have an idea of like where my fingers might be in space, but I don't necessarily know for sure. And I know that sometimes I've gotten myself injured because I've been totally wrong as to like what my pelvis is doing, for example, as it were the relative to my lower back.
Yeah, so when you mention that, Brody, then to me, like one of like I said, part of that whole assessment of how the brain's working, it sounds like there might be some issues with proprioception, because when I'm doing this, like I can clearly sense that my fingers are like at the very least we can start here. Like if your arms are straight out in front of you, do you know they're straight out in front of you versus behind your back versus above your head?
Yeah, yeah, I
Okay,
do know
wow.
that.
So how do you know that? Like that's the question. Is it are you
Yeah,
like
right.
feeling it? Are you feeling your arms, or are you using the sense of touch? No, because you're not touching them. Are you using the sense of
Right. I'm not
sight?
touching anything in space. Yeah, no, that's not
Yeah,
online
you're not.
either. My eyes are closed.
Yeah, exactly. So you're not using vision. You're not using sound because I don't think your arms are talking to you. That might be
Not so
something
much, no.
different. Yeah. So the way we know where our bodies are without, being able to see them is through that sense of proprioception. And so there's many different layers of how well we can do it. And all of that's very reflective of very specific areas of our brains, specifically the cerebellum and parietal lobe. So a lot of patients I work with who might injure themselves or, bump into things a lot or trip, and that usually signals that there might be a weakness in the proprioceptive systems. But the great thing is there's things we can do to actually retrain that.
Awesome. And so what kinds of things can we do?
Everything that you actually described, like for example, when you do like body awareness exercise, so things like qigong, and especially when you do that with your eyes closed, that really exercises your parietal lobe, that really exercises your cerebellum. Now, for a lot of my patients who have issues in these areas, what's needed before they close their eyes is actually doing it in front of a mirror first, so you can get visual feedback as to where your body is, and then kind of connect that where your actual body is. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. And just on a personal note, when my back was awful, I was doing yoga probably 6 or 7 days a week in a studio that didn't have a mirror. And I definitely was having some disc issues. I finally had to totally stop doing yoga just because I was hurting myself over and over again. And it was just like to the point of like not being able to just do everyday activities. And I was like, this is not working for me. So what I did was I switched entirely to going to a bar 3 studio, which is like small, controlled Pilates-like movements and yoga-like movements with some weights thrown in, but in a room full of mirrors. Just doing something as simple as a crescent lunge, or a warrior one pose where it's like, wow, my pelvis is totally not where I think it is. And like really just discovering like that for a long time, I was probably reinforcing the exact wrong pathways for my back, thinking that I was doing this awesome thing for myself, and so I'll hold my hip bones as I look in the mirror. I'll stare into the mirror until I understand like, okay, yeah, like I think that my pelvis is level. I think that my hips are in line. I think that nothing's rotating, but wow, look at that. Look at how wrong I am. And it took really a couple of years before I felt like I could correct just the habitual way that I would do a lunge.
Yeah, isn't that so fascinating? That's so cool. It's just, with your experience of that, using it's kind of illustrates this concept I'm talking about. This idea of body awareness comes in many different flavors, and proprioception is, I think, one of the most important ones, that we get. It's information that we get from, our muscles and our joints. Like there's these little motion detectors and sensors within every single joint and every single muscle in our body that when I close my eyes and I hold my arms straight out in front of me, tells me that I'm doing that without a visual cue, without actually seeing it. And so in your case, that's really cool that you found that outlet and then you used mirrors and like what I was talking about, using the visual cues, and then you connect that and you get that feedback. They're like, oh, actually my shoulder wasn't where I thought it was, and you can see that and then correct it accordingly. And so I found that a combination of using mirrors as well as somatic body work, literally, like things like massage or chiropractic or between now are all these different somatic therapies. When you combine the two together, it goes even deeper into the nervous system, accelerating that neuroplasticity.
Yeah, I can imagine just in that it's helpful to be in your body, and it's helpful to have a trained professional who knows how the body's supposed to work and can see, all right, maybe your body's adapting to this thing that's tight, or this thing that's out of alignment, or this thing, like this area of the body where the energy isn't flowing as well. And that if you have somebody there who's going to help mechanically correct that for you, or to intervene, that could unlock and help with someone's progress a lot faster than maybe they could on their own.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's really cool is a lot of the research that I've been doing the past few years examines, like, we all talk about the mind-body connection where our emotions or our belief systems can shift, like our body's health. Like, it could impact our digestion or impact our immune system or impact our adrenals, right? And so we all talk about the mind-body connection, but one just as important, if not, I think more important, is the body-mind connection, meaning like how when our bodies work really well, it actually impacts our emotions. As an example, we're talking kind of theoretically and whatnot, these concepts of proprioception, but one of the things proprioception really does for us in our day-to-day life is it allows us to move around, comfortably on this planet, and have a sense, a really concrete sense of being grounded. And so what ends up happening when people have different levels of, proprioceptive imbalances where they're not as at home in their body, that can actually lead to things like anxiety. But the thing is, it's actually a physical reason for anxiety. It actually doesn't originate in the emotions. It actually originates in the body. So, for example, if some of you out there, one thing you can do is test your balance, by standing up, and then actually, Brody, if you want to do this with me, stand up. I'll do that too. So if you just stand up and put your feet as close together as possible. Okay, and now just look straight ahead, and now close your eyes. So do you feel any sway? So some of you in the audience doing this right now with us, if you close your eyes, you might notice that you sway a little more than with your eyes open. How are you feeling? You're probably pretty solid just because of all the great practices that you do.
As I bend down to talk into the microphone, yeah, I can do that.
Yeah, cool. So now another way to even further fine tune it is try balancing with your eyes open, balance on your right leg. How does that feel?
Pretty good.
Pretty good. Awesome. Now let's try balancing on your left leg. And everyone listening out there can try these little exercises too.
Yeah, my balance is on today. Some days it absolutely isn't, but at the moment, this is going okay.
Yeah, it's interesting how it could fluctuate based on different factors. So now what I want you to do is try balancing on your right leg again, and then this time close your eyes. And so some of you out there, if you're doing this, you might notice with your eyes closed, it's actually a lot harder. You might feel like you're swaying a bit.
Definitely much harder.
Yeah, exactly. And then try opening your eyes and then try balancing on your left foot and then closing your eyes now.
It just can't do it nearly as long.
Yeah, exactly. And so some people out there, they might find that as soon as they close their eyes, they almost fall over, or maybe the right side is not as balanced as the left side. And so there's all these different subtleties and levels. Like for me, when I balance on my left foot and I close my eyes, I'm really unsteady. So I feel that, but it not only tells us like, okay, I'm not very good at balancing on my left leg, but it's actually very reflective of what's happening in my nervous system, specifically, again, the left cerebellum. So the point of this whole exercise is these things are happening in the background. We're not even aware of it. Like as we're walking through our life thinking about, oh, okay, what do I have to buy at the grocery store? What am I going to talk about during this podcast? As we're going through life thinking about these things, if our proprioceptive systems aren't working like 100%, subconsciously keeping us grounded, that takes up so much mental energy where we might experience anxiety or we might experience just not feeling fully grounded, leading to, maybe, confidence issues or whatever. And that could come up as what we might experience or label as an emotional issue. But in actuality, it's a physiological issue. And that's one of the reasons why things like yoga, Pilates, when we get strong in our balance in our bodies, we become more confident and grounded in this world.
I love that you're bringing this up. I think that so is what you're saying basically that if we can actually physically cultivate our sense of our connection to the ground, or our sense of balance, or like just being in our body and working on our sense of body awareness or proprioception, that can actually have an effect on our minds and how we feel in the world.
Absolutely. It's profound effects, and you think about like little kids too, right? A great example is if you watch a baby develop, what's it doing? It's exploring the world, it's like crawling around, getting it, smelling things, tasting things. All those different senses help to develop its brain. And then when it starts to stand up and like balance, it just looks really anxious, right? Because it can't balance. And all of its mental energy is into what? It's not into like, philosophizing on the meaning of life. It's not into, writing.
How do I stand up?
Yeah, exactly. How do I stand up? And then as it becomes more unconscious, then it could start exploring things and curiosity becomes, at the forefront again. And so my point is a lot of us, including myself, when we do these more subtle tests, we walk around our lives with a lot of our mental energy in the background, just being able to like maintain balance or like move about the world. Again, it's not so obvious when you're with your eyes open and you can see things, but when you do these more subtle tests, like for example, closing your eyes or try balancing on one foot, or if you're pretty good with that, try again, take your the cushion on your couch, do the same test. You're going to find that, wow, the more challenging I make it, the harder it is. But if you can train your mind and train your body that way, all of a sudden it frees up this other mental energy for the higher things in life.
The Basics of Chinese Medicine, Your Inner Ecosystem is an 8-week Learn From Anywhere course that will demystify acupuncture and Chinese medicine. By the end of the course, you'll be able to begin to align your lifestyle and diet with daily and seasonal rhythms so you can digest better, have more energy, and stay healthy, and determine which systems in your body tend to be out of balance and how you might tend to them with lifestyle, diet, acupressure, and more. Each week, you'll get 20 to 30 minutes of an audio lecture so you can listen in your car, at the gym, while you're washing dishes, or wherever. Fun Quizlets, reflection questions, and exercises to reinforce the material you're learning. Plus, you'll get 3 60-minute group phone calls with Brody so you can ask questions, discuss new concepts with classmates, and learn in a group setting. Go to brodywelch.com and click on Basics of Chinese Medicine under the Learn From Home tab to find out more. Classes start October 18th, so reserve your spot today.
And it sounds like you would recommend that this could be a place to start if we are in fact dealing with anxiety, of that simply just practicing what it feels like to be in our bodies, to be grounded in this way, that could be a good step.
Absolutely. And there's like different levels of it. So as an example, I run these brain camps at our office here. And so this one lady I was working with, a client of mine, she flew in from Alaska because she's been suffering from anxiety for pretty much her whole life. And so I did my whole assessment, and prior to that, I did like a functional medicine assessment looking at nutrition and looking at neurochemistry. And so we got her on a basic diet, got her on some supplements, and we were already making some headway, but she was still dealing with this anxiety. And so she came to the office. I did my whole assessment. I did that test that I had all of us kind of do just now. And sure enough, I found imbalances from left to right. And in addition, another very important sense is the sense that we call the vestibular sense, related to our inner ears. Our inner ears allow us to know where our heads are relative to the room, relative to the rest of our bodies. So people with imbalances in their inner ear, for example, this client of mine, she suffered from motion sickness. She suffered from dizziness. If she'd be in a car too long as a passenger, especially in the back seat, she'd get nauseous. But all those, again, speak to this imbalance of body awareness. And so when I found that, number one, her cerebellum was off based on doing that little balance test. And number two, when I looked at how her eyes moved, and then with her history of motion sickness, I also found that she had an imbalance in her inner ear. Then, as part of the brain exercises, the brain retraining, the Sensorigenomics, I did some balance exercise. I had to do some balance exercise on the left foot. I did some adjustments and some specific reflex massage work on the left side of her body. And I also put her on a chair, had her look at a dot, and I spun her to the left. Because what that does is actually activates the sense, the vestibular sense, and it retrains the inner ear. And she was in town for a 2-week brain camp. Within 1 week, like she had told me her whole life, whenever she'd get her blood drawn, she would literally pass out from the anxiety of it. Within 1 week, when we sent her out to get blood work, she didn't even flinch. Like she got her blood drawn. She didn't experience any anxiety. She didn't pass out. And within that 1 week, when we were doing things to retrain her proprioception, through balance, through adjustments, and then through these vestibular rehab, the spinning her in a chair, we literally addressed one of the major root causes for her anxiety was this problem and imbalance in her proprioception and her body awareness.
That is so cool. I want to go to brain camp. That sounds like super fun and fascinating.
It is actually. It's a lot of fun. We have people jumping on trampolines. We have vibration plates. We have cold laser. We have this infrared sauna for detox. There's all these different things we do to, again, using the 5 common senses or using Sensorigenomics to target the areas of the nervous system that are actually at the root cause for things like anxiety or for brain fog or concussion. You're reading my mind. You realize that? Like I literally was just about to ask you about brain fog. So, and also, and the other question that was percolating for me was just are there any other kind of like what you would consider the core competencies of proprioception or body awareness practices that you recommend that everyone do in a preventative way, and could just in general? And I know a lot of people out there deal with things like anxiety and depression. That's something that we talk a lot about on the show, and that's something that I personally have a history with both. And it's and I know it's the kind of thing that I treat in my clinic like every day of the week. So any tips that you would have as far as, and the other thing too is brain fog. A lot of people are either dealing with things like menopause or autoimmune stuff where mental confusion and just feeling like they're thinking through fog, that I would love to know your take on self-care that we could perhaps put into place for either of those conditions. Yeah, absolutely. We can start with brain fog in general. So whenever it comes to neurological symptoms, I look at 3 major things. Number 1, I look at how well the physical brain is working. So like different areas of the nervous system like the cerebellum or the frontal lobe. Number 2, I look at the chemical brain, like neurochemistry. Is there inflammation? Is there toxicity? Is there mitochondrial weaknesses? And finally, number 3, I look at the emotional brain. Is there a lot of stress, or are there belief systems holding us back? So with that framework in mind, some things we could do for brain fog. One of the key things that I look at in brain fog is making sure that there isn't neuroinflammation, especially if the brain fog is constant. Like if it's going on all throughout the day, you're experiencing as soon as you wake up, there's no times in the day where there's any clarity. That sounds more like a neurochemical issue. And one of the most common things is neuroinflammation. So a very simple thing that I do in my life when I experience brain fog and that I recommend to all my patients is trying to remove things such as gluten and dairy from the diet. Because for most people, myself included, I'm sensitive to gluten and I'm sensitive to dairy. So it doesn't so much manifest as like digestive issues for me. there are what are known as the extraintestinal symptoms of gluten sensitivity or dairy sensitivity. And that could be things like fatigue, brain fog, anxiety, depression, all of that. So number one tip I could recommend is getting rid of gluten and dairy for at least 30 days and doing it like 100%.
That can, I think, be such important advice, especially for people who, like where they just feel like they can't get out of it. It's likely something lifestyle related, right? It's likely something that is a constant input.
Yeah, if it's a continuous type of brain fog, then there's something more what I call systemic, kind of impacting their entire nervous system. Now, on the flip side of that, if it's brain fog when it's just afternoon, like in the afternoon after you have lunch or dinner, have lunch and you're experiencing brain fog, then it could be a food sensitivity. It could be a blood sugar imbalance. So different things. If it's a blood sugar imbalance, then eating more healthy fats throughout the day can really be good to help balance your blood sugar. So things like I like to start my day with fish oils, and I start my day with like coconut oil and a tablespoon of olive oil just to kind of give me enough energy and fuel throughout the day. So that's a really great tip that people could incorporate, especially if it's not brain fog that's like 110% all the time. If it's more kind of fluctuates, that could be a blood sugar issue. So eating healthy fats, especially, fish oils, the specific fish oil DHA is really great for the synapses in our brains to kind of help connect memories, connect our thoughts, speed up our ability, our mental recall, all of that.
And with DHA, I know a lot of listeners out there are concerned about how to age optimally and don't want to get Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia where like losing your mental capacity is a scary thing. Is that the kind of thing that would be good preventative medicine also for Alzheimer's?
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to Alzheimer's, this is based on Dr. Dale Bredesen's work, and he was at the IFM conference this year on the brain, the international conference that I spoke at as well, and he came up with there's actually 6 different subtypes of Alzheimer's, and it fits perfectly with how I've been working with patients with Alzheimer's and dementia. That even though a person might have the same symptom, of memory issues or, cognitive issues, it doesn't necessarily mean they have the same underlying root cause. And so a lot of his work really speaks to that functional medicine approach that I've been using in my practice for years. I love how he's kind of laid it all out. So one of the subtypes of Alzheimer's is an inflammatory root cause. And I've seen that in my practice time and time again. And so doing anything we can to decrease inflammation, again, getting rid of gluten, getting rid of food sensitivities, taking things like EPA and DHA found in fish oils, or if our listeners out there are vegetarian, there are vegan sources from things like algae and whatnot. And so DHA, EPA can be very powerful for synaptic connections in our brain and to decrease inflammation, which could be one of the major root causes for things like dementia or Alzheimer's.
Is one of the subtypes that I hear about Alzheimer's being nicknamed type 3 diabetes. Is that something that he identifies as well?
Yeah, absolutely. He calls that the subtype 1.5, where it's a combination of both inflammatory issues as well as not having enough trophic or growth factors. And so, yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely correct. A lot of people are starting to call Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes, and that's referring to the impact that blood sugar imbalances have on brain health as well as inflammation. And so, yeah, a lot of the times a lot of the patients I work with dementia or mild cognitive impairment or even Alzheimer's, which is kind of like the full-blown symptoms of mild cognitive impairment, we look at things like balancing blood sugar. We look at things like decreasing inflammation. So a lot of the things I had already mentioned before, like increasing healthy fats. Another really great thing, especially for people suffering from Alzheimer's or concussion or who have anxiety, is doing things like a ketogenic diet or intermittent fasting. So all those things, all the research has shown, all the research I've shown or I've seen and working with patients throughout the years, the ketogenic diet is one of the best diets for the brain, but it's not necessarily meant to be forever. It's just, I use it, again, my philosophy on using food as medicine. And so we can actually use specific types of diets for specific issues. So for example, if a person comes and they're suffering from anxiety and I find that it's a blood sugar issue, I might recommend intermittent fasting, where they might have a nice big breakfast, low sugar, and so something like having avocados, some coconut oil, maybe some eggs, and some vegetables, low glycemic vegetables like broccoli or asparagus, and then not eating lunch, and then having like a relatively light dinner like salmon or asparagus again, or arugula, some types of vegetables. And so there's like this 10 to 12 hour gap in between that their blood sugar is able to balance out, and it triggers what's known as a ketogenic response, which is super fuel for the brain. And so for people who don't do well on really hardcore ketogenic diets, I find that intermittent fasting works really well.
Would you recommend intermittent fasting? It's really a big trend right now in my yoga health coach community. A lot of people are really interested in it. For women with hormonal imbalances, I've heard it can be not such a great idea. What's your take on that?
Absolutely, and I see that all the time in my practice. I find in general that men do really well with hardcore ketogenic diets. Like I did one myself, 45 days. I never felt better in my life. Like I didn't get grumpy by the end of the day. I had a lot of focus and energy. And so I see that a lot with a lot of my male patients. They do very well with ketogenic diets, like hardcore ketogenic diets. Whereas a lot of the women I work with in my practice who have autoimmune issues or hormonal issues, I usually don't start them there. So normally I find that a better approach to them, at least as a starting point, is to balance their blood sugar through more like a 3-hour diet or a grazing diet, like eating, frequently throughout the day, not going without food more than 3 hours, and making sure the food's like nutrient dense, like, good fats, healthy proteins, low glycemic vegetables, maybe some fruit. And so I find in general, women do better with that. And so if I ever have a woman who is suffering from anxiety, maybe after a head injury, then I will actually, depending on where they're at in the whole process, if their blood sugar levels are really out of whack and, they have these mood swings throughout the day, or they have a lot of energy and they crash, I don't start there. I start with getting them eating throughout the day, like grazing, just like I had described, like this 3-hour diet, this blood sugar diet. And once they're balanced there, I might start to attempt doing like intermittent fasting and maybe ketosis just for like 2 to 4 weeks maximum. Just, again, using food as this medicine, very specific therapeutics to help the brain heal. But even once that's done, then kind of segue them back into more a blood sugar balancing diet, like a 3-hour diet.
In Chinese medicine and in Ayurveda, we don't want to be activating the digestive system all the time. We want to give it a break and allow the body to kind of detoxify. And it sounds like what you're saying is kind of a gradual approach, like stabilize blood sugar first, eating a whole foods approach, and then the person might be ready to increase their fasting time.
Yeah, if it's necessary. A lot of times when I work with women with hormonal issues or with anxiety, I find that just doing that blood sugar stabilizing approach to the 3-hour diet, kind of grazing lightly throughout the day, a lot of times their health improves dramatically. So I don't always incorporate the ketogenic, but again, I do work with a lot of patients who have had head injuries, and the ketogenic diet's one of the best ways to kind of jumpstart the brain again, in addition to using the 5 common sense.
That's because, like, I remember learning this in one of the talks at Mindshare that when we go into a fasting state, it triggers the growth factor in our brain.
Yeah, exactly. What we call BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It's miracle grow for your brain. So when we talk about neuroplasticity, just like I said before, when it comes to brain health, there's the physical brain and then the chemical brain as well as the emotional brain. So whenever I do things in my practice or when I give at-home exercises using the senses, that's working on the structural physical brain. It's literally rewiring the circuits in our brain. It's kind of like when you go to the gym and you rebuild muscles. When you do an exercise to your muscle, like you're doing like a push-up, you're literally like stressing the muscles so then they grow stronger. Same thing happens for the physical brain. But in order for that to kind of accelerate, we want to make sure the chemical brain is healthy. Things like BDNF is fantastic. And there's different ways of increasing BDNF. Again, yeah, just like you said, just like at the Mindshare talk, the ketogenic diet it totally enhances BDNF. DHA totally enhances this miracle grow for our brain. And then things like curcumin totally increases BDNF levels. Aerobic exercise totally increases BDNF. So whenever I work with patients and clients, I focus first, again, looking at, okay, how can we create the best environment in the chemical brain so that when we do these 5 common senses exercises for the structural brain, that'll have the most impact. And so as an example...
That is so fascinating.
Yeah,
go on with your example.
Yeah, that's the approach that I find to be really, really effective. And you have to do it in the right process. And I've been doing this for years, and I've kind of figured out these patterns. So that's why, for example, when clients come in for these brain camps, we do an initial assessment online first, just to kind of prime their brain cells with supporting the chemical brain. And then once they come in, we do these Sensorigenomic or 5 common senses approaches, doing things like balance exercises, eye exercises, aromatherapy, mirror therapy, all these different things. I have people bouncing on trampolines. It's a lot of fun. It's like an adult playground.
That sounds awesome. Speaking of aromatherapy, like I know a lot of people out there play around with essential oils. Are there any that we should really know about for the brain?
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to things like anxiety, lavender works wonderfully. Lavender has been shown in the research to help with anxiety. And the cool thing is lavender does that by both working on the chemical brain, but it also works on the emotional brain. And finally, it actually activates and strengthens the physical brain. Specifically, if you guys have high quality lavender essential oil, not only can you diffuse it throughout your house, in a diffuser, but if you take it and you inhale it just specifically into your left nostril, what that will do, it specifically targets the left side of your brain. And a lot of times people with anxiety, one of the neurological root causes in the physical brain is that there's overactivity of the right hemisphere. And the right side of the brain is a very empathic, compassionate, side of the brain, which is a beautiful thing. It's a very abstract, very creative, very yin part of the brain. But if there's too much of that, it can actually then lead to anxiety. And so what we want to do is balance that out by activating the left brain, or more the masculine yang brain. And we could do that by smelling lavender into the left side of your nose.
Oh, that's such a cool tip. Thanks for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And other things for people out there who are dealing with anxiety, using this neurological approach by strengthening the structural physical brain, any type of exercise that activates the left brain could be very helpful for anxiety. So, for example, my partner, she's suffered from anxiety her whole life. And one of the things she found, like growing up, whenever she'd be like having anxiety, she would intuitively break out her calculus book and start doing calculus problems, and that would completely address the anxiety. And so she didn't understand it, but it worked. And so later on, when I explained that to her, she's like, "Oh, I was activating the left side of my frontal lobe by doing these math problems." So the point is you don't have to do like calculus, but anything that doesn't challenge your brain too much, that's more like linear, logical, analytic. So it could be things like Sudoku or a crossword puzzle, or doing things like simple arithmetic can actually be very helpful to activate the left side of your brain, like the more yang part of the brain, and then helping to bring balance and addressing the anxiety.
Oh, yay. I love that you just brought that up too. So yeah, another self-care tip for people who are empathic to get into a more mental problem-solving kind of mode.
Exactly, yeah. And specifically, a lot of people who have anxiety from a neurological perspective, they have overactivity of this. It's actually what we call a neural network, where it's multiple regions of the brain communicating. It's called the default mode network. And a lot of people who suffer from anxiety or depression, there's too much activity in the default mode network, which lives mainly in the right hemisphere, in the yin hemisphere. And again, I believe that it's all about balance, right? It's not having too much yin, it's not having too much yang, it's about having balance. And so when there's overactivity in the yin part or in the default mode network, any type of thing that really heightens your focus and concentration can help alleviate anxiety or depression. So another great exercise that I recommend to a lot of my clients, that if you guys suffer from anxiety or depression out there, is candlelight meditation. And that's found in these traditional yogic practices. But what you do is you just take a candle. And if you don't have a candle, what you can actually do is just take a piece, like a Post-it note, and draw a dot on it. So either way, whatever works. I like the candle because it's a little more romantic, right? It's a little more aesthetic. It has
its own energetics, right? Like it's not only a focal point, but it in and of itself it's a gentle it sets a tone.
Yeah, I love fire. If you do my whole chart, I have a lot of fire and water. So anyways, I prefer the candle. So you can take a candle, light it, and then sit about 12 inches away so your eyes aren't too close, so you're not like creating what's known as convergence. So at least 12 inches away, and have it at about eye level. So you might want to place it on a little table or on a chair, and you're seated on the floor. And then what you do is you just gaze at the candle, and just your goal is to maintain as much focus as possible. And you might find that when you're first starting out, after about 15 seconds, your eyes dart off the candle, or your mind starts to wander. So it's just this very powerful meditative practice that activates the left hemisphere, specifically these areas we call the central executive network. And it's interesting when we talk about yin and yang, like yin is this default mode network in the right hemisphere, where this more yang part is the central executive network in the left hemisphere. And guess what? When scientists have done like functional MRI studies looking at like what happens in the brain, so when the default mode network or the yin part of the brain gets active, guess what gets shut off? It's that yang part, the central executive network. So it's like this yin yang beautiful thing. So the point is we want to help bring balance. And so when we do things like a candlelight meditation, it helps to shut off that overactive right hemisphere that can cause anxiety or depression, and it activates the left hemisphere or this yang part of the brain, helping to bring balance.
That is so cool. All right, that's definitely. And how long do you recommend that people gaze at the candle?
So everyone's unique and everyone's different at where they're at. So I usually recommend starting at 1 minute. And the goal, again, isn't just doing it, but really focusing and seeing if you can maintain your focus for 1 minute. It doesn't seem like a very long time, but if you're really focusing and not just kind of gazing or spacing out, then like the goal is 1 minute and then working up to 3 minutes.
So cool. I'm definitely going to try that. I know we're just about out of time. I feel like I could just continue to ask you questions all day long, but maybe you'll be willing to come back and follow up with me some other time. But I just can't thank you enough for all of the wonderful practical advice that you've offered us today.
Yeah, you're very welcome, Brody. And thank you so much for inviting me to your podcast. And I hope this information is helpful to all our listeners out there.
One last question is, if people want to connect with you, how can they find you?
Yeah, they can check out my website, themodernbrain.com. And yeah, on themodernbrain.com, we have blog there. We have a lot of practical tips, just like I shared with you guys today, and they can check that out.
I'll make sure that gets into the show notes. Dr. Chiu, thanks again. This has been awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brody. Yeah, let's make it happen again.
This episode is brought to you by 11 Weeks to Level Up Your Life, the self-care bootcamp program that asks, what does the next version of you look like? The upgraded version of me gets great sleep, experiences abundant energy and flow, loves her body, and gets a ridiculous amount done from a place of centered presence. The thing is, the same habits that got you where you are aren't necessarily going to get you where you want to be, and it's tough to change habits on your own. It's so much easier to have some guidance, accountability, and supportive peers who will help you raise the bar. I want to help you off your plateau, to help you bridge the gap between knowing what you need to take care of yourself and actually doing those things, like dialing in a daily body-mind practice, getting enough restorative sleep, eating what your body can best digest, and moving through life at a pace that feels easeful and in integrity with your own energy. If you feel ready to step into the next version of yourself and to really prioritize the essential habits of self-care necessary to step into your most thriving self, I'd love to help you. Go to brodywelch.com. That's BRODIEWELCH.com. Head to the Level Up page and schedule your free discovery call. Do it today. The next round of Level Up starts October 10th, and there are only a few spots left.
Thanks for listening today. For more episodes of A Healthy Curiosity, you can visit the iTunes store. If you appreciated today's show, please leave us a review. This helps other people to find the podcast. You could also head to brodywelch.com, where you can find free self-care resources, learn more about Chinese medicine, and let me know what you'd like to hear about on future episodes. I'd love to hear from you. Till next time, be good to yourself.